Hello friends, I am glad to see you again. Today I'm going to tell you about a neighbor who says she's going to live in my house. I dreamed of living in a cozy mountain house when I was younger. Snow-capped peaks in winter, refreshing evergreen scents in summer, and maybe a few neighbors who kept to themselves. After years of saving and hours of house hunting, I found a small, affordable place in a forested area with only a dozen homes on winding roads. My luck was unbelievable. The house isn't luxurious, but I call it charming because of its solid structure, stunning view, and large stone fireplace that keeps me warm in the mountain winds. One neighbor was the only drawback, which I initially dismissed as minor. Call her Mary Beth. Mary Beth struck me as odd from the start. My first meeting with her was a month after moving in. She stood at my property line with her arms folded, watching me as I carried groceries from my car to the front porch. I could hear the pine trees rustling in the quiet, but her awkward stare was louder. It was a polite wave. After staring, she gave me a half nod and turned to go home. No greeting, no welcome to the neighborhood, just that cold disapproval. I assumed she was a private person who guarded her space as fiercely as I do, so I shrugged. Within a week, I started hearing pieces from the other neighbors when we met at the town's only diner or small general store. One elderly couple told me, Mary Beth has been living here for years, but she's never quite gotten along with anyone. A roadside stand vendor who sold homemade pies said Mary Beth had accused her of trying to poison the neighborhood with suspicious recipes. No one liked Mary Beth, but most accepted her as a mountain fixture, like a stubborn tree that wouldn't be uprooted by storms. I lived peacefully for 2 years. I taught myself cabin maintenance, firewood gathering, and minor roof repairs. I chased off raccoons in the trash and met a curious black bear. Mary Beth remained the biggest mystery. She rarely spoke to me, but I heard she talked about me a lot. She called me the poor hermit on the mountain, or the penny pincher who bought that old dump because no one else wanted it. I never confronted her about it, whether she believed it or enjoyed the gossip. I'm not defined by a cranky neighbor's fleeting opinions. I mostly ignored rumors. I went to the mountain to escape drama, not fuel it. Mary Beth's tales became more absurd. She told people I was squatting illegally. She then told 2 gullible neighbors that I had set up weird traps to deter intruders. Another rumor was that I didn't own the land and the real owner would evict me any day. Because my county-documented purchase was legitimate, no one believed her. Everyone laughed most at her tall tales. In such a small community, people confide. Mary Beth had lived in a big city, done well financially, and moved to the mountain thinking she would rule. Naturally, that didn't work. Many locals prefer to live and let live. They dislike self-proclaimed big shots who meddle in others' business. She had encounters with most neighbors, ironically making them more sympathetic to me. Some would stop by my house and joke, "Has Mary Beth told you you're living illegally on your own property?" We'd laugh and I'd move on. Then came a memorable week. Local weather forecasts predicted strong storms. My metal roof was battered by rain and mountain gusts for 2 days. The ground became muddy and minor rock slides blocked some narrow mountain passes. Nobody moved for a while. As I settled into a night of reading by the fireplace on the 3rd day of that storm, my front door banged loudly. It was frantic, unexpected, and not a polite knock or doorbell ring. My first thought was anxiety. A neighbor may have needed help, a car may have slid off the road, or an accident occurred. I dropped my book, grabbed an old sweater, and ran out the door. Almost expecting a panicked neighbor or the local volunteer firefighter, I opened it cautiously. Instead, Mary Beth stood drenched. Her eyes were wild and she was breathing heavily like she had run from home. Without asking what was wrong, she brushed past me, water dripping onto the entryway floor, and rambled, "I need a place to stay tonight. Listen, I'm not paying for motels. After a huge fight, my husband suggested I stay in a motel, which is the biggest waste of money. I won't waste money." Her sudden appearance and flurry of words shocked me. I calmed down and asked, "Are you okay? Did anything happen at your house?" Possibly she had a terrible fight and was afraid for her safety. Despite our strained relationship, I wouldn't throw someone into a storm if they were in danger, she huffed. Though my husband told me to leave, I told him I wouldn't throw money at a motel because it's still my home. I wondered, who here is probably too dumb to say no? Then I remembered you. Her words hurt, but her barging in was so shocking that I tried to stay calm. "What are you saying?" I asked in a neutral tone. Mary Beth wiped rainwater from her hair and inspected my living room like a disapproving inspector, deepening my confusion. She mocked my worn rug, mismatched couch cushions, and plain windows. Finally, She sniffed disapprovingly at my modest kitchen. She turned around, put her hands on her hips, and said, "I'm staying here tonight. Maybe longer. Unsure yet. However, you will house me as long as I need." Looking at her, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The woman who had mocked me for years demanded shelter in the most offensive way. I laughed confusedly. "Mary Beth, you can't barge into my house and demand a stay. The town has a motel 10 miles away. I can call someone to help you if you can't drive." With an angry wave, she stopped me. "No, I'm not paying to sleep in a seedy, cheap place. Additionally, you must help a neighbor." Her face became contemptuous. "No sense of community?" Blinking, I took in her words. My sense of community? She demanded I house her after years of telling everyone I'm a broke hermit on the verge of eviction? The irony was too much to handle. Mary Beth continued. She returned to the front door, opened it, and pointed to a suitcase on my porch. She left it when she barged in. She turned to me with cold determination and made an ultimatum that nearly knocked me over. "And if you refuse, I'll see to it that you lose this property. I have powerful friends. I'll evict you quickly. You'll be homeless by the weekend." I lost all sympathy for her then. She had no right to insult me at home. As quietly as possible, I said, "Mary Beth, you're trespassing in my house. You demand and threaten. This is wrong. Maybe you should leave." In anger, her eyes flared. "You think I don't know the law? I know my stuff. I will accuse you of assault if you push me into that storm. You assaulted and threatened me. Who will authorities trust? Me, with stable finances, or you, with your rundown shack?" Not telling her to leave immediately took all my self-control. I felt disbelief, anger, and anxiety. I'd never dealt with a brazen manipulator at home. Part of me wanted to show her the door by any means, but my cautious side told me to stay calm. She could lose a fight if she twisted it into a story. I breathed deeply and went to my phone. I said, "If you're really in trouble, I can call a local deputy. Maybe they can take you to a shelter or motel. I don't like you moving in without my permission." She pulled her phone from her pocket and pointed it at me. "Go ahead," she growled. "Let's see who calls the police first. I'll tell them you threatened me, refused me shelter during a dangerous storm, and were a crazy neighbor who always hated me. How will that affect you?" I swallowed hard, realizing this was more complicated than I wanted. I could call her bluff, but if she lied, I could face legal trouble. That complaint wouldn't stick, but it could cause me unnecessary trouble. The roads were bad, so calling the local deputy or driving her to a motel could fail. She raised an eyebrow and half-stepped toward me. "Will you give me a room or should I call?" I contemplated. I could have let her stay the night to calm things down. Perhaps that was the easiest solution. I could help her find a permanent arrangement or encourage her to reconcile with her husband tomorrow after the storm. As unpleasant as it was, I thought letting her stay one night might prevent a bigger conflict. Giving in to her intimidation repulsed me. Still, it was late, the storm was fierce, and I didn't want to do anything regrettable in the moment. Keeping my cool, I said, "All right, you can sleep in the spare room. For one night. Tomorrow we plan your next move." She nodded, satisfied, and brought her suitcase in. Staring at the locks, I closed the door and wondered if I should reinforce them after she left. My entire being was tense. I felt trapped by her manipulation, despite being an uninvited guest. Her smug smile in my living room made me rage. I told her, "The spare room is upstairs. Second door on left. Clean bedding is in the closet. You can help yourself." She huffed and rolled her suitcase up the stairs without thanking me. "If there's no decent towels, I'll need you to get some from your stash," she yelled. She added, "And please fix the heat. This place is cold." My jaw tightened. I went to bed to avoid further conversation. I tried to relax by reading, but my mind raced with questions. What if she looked through my stuff? What if she lied? How did I let her force me into this odd situation? Exhaustion made me fall asleep, but my dreams were anxious. I woke up early the next morning to rain on the roof. I looked outside. Mud coated the driveway, and thick fog hung over the mountain. Mary Beth might have changed her mind and left during the night, I thought. However, as soon as I entered the hallway, I heard her searching the kitchen. The rummaging implied ownership. Cabinet doors flung open, drawers yanked out, silverware clattering. A feeling of unease came over me. This was not a house guest politely searching for a spoon. This was someone who felt entitled to the space. Walking into the kitchen, I tried to stay calm. Mary Beth made coffee. She looked at me with mild irritation. "You have terrible coffee. Improve the blend next time. Our creamer is gone." I bit my tongue to avoid escalation on an empty stomach. "I don't usually keep creamer," I whispered. "If you need milk, it's in the fridge." She looked disgusted and shrugged. I guess I can make do. She poured herself a cup and left me. I considered telling her to leave now. With the storm continuing and a possible rock slide making the roads questionable, I didn't want to do anything rash that could lead her to grab her phone and lie. I decided to be more strategic. After making my coffee and eating breakfast, I cornered her in the living room and calmly said, "All right, Mary Beth, we need to figure out your plan. I cannot keep you here forever. After fighting with your husband, you should reconcile or move on. I'll help, but on our terms." She grinned. "I stay here as long as I want. You should be grateful because you'll make a powerful friend." I almost choked on my coffee at that comment. True friend? She had slandered me for years. "Look, I'm not interested in hosting a house guest under threat," I said. Not just my words were ignored. "We should discuss more important topics. Your back property line caught my eye. A bit overgrown. Did you know you border public land?" As if she were threatening to tip off officials to cause me problems, she said. "If you're not careful, the county might come in and do expensive inspections." I crossed my arms, losing patience. "Are you blackmailing me, Mary Beth?" She shrugged with that haughty grin. "Call it whatever you want. I prefer to call it a chance to stay on good terms. I can probably help you with some permit issues if you cooperate." The final straw. It wasn't just a place to sleep. She exerted power without real authority, believing me to be naive or easily intimidated. I told her, "If that's how you behave, this arrangement ends. I'll drive you down the mountain if necessary. You won't stay longer." She frowned. "You touch my suitcase and I call the police." I breathed deeply to avoid yelling. Instead, I retreated and said, "Fine, let's call them together." I pick up my phone and her eyes widen, but I continued. "You broke in last night and threatened to evict me if I didn't comply. Let's see whose story they trust." Mary Beth's face became angry and cautious. She probably knew law enforcement would question her presence on my property. She could be charged with trespassing or intimidation. However, she knew the roads might be too dangerous for a quick response. She glared. "You wouldn't dare!" I shrugged to appear calm. "I have every right to. You're in my house without permission. Trespassing. I can show them texts from neighbors about your lies. The messages you sent me last month can be shown. Remember your email about running me off the mountain? Looks bad for you." I lied about showing them neighbor messages, but I had her older emails complaining about my house's exterior color and lowering property values. While they weren't as threatening as I made them out to be, law enforcement would be suspicious if I said she was intimidated into entering. She narrowed her eyes and appeared to resist. Her dismissive laugh was like a switch going off. "All right, I suppose we can compromise. Just say I stay until the storm passes. Then we'll figure something out." I didn't want her to stay another minute, but I realized that the storm was still going on, and the roads were messed up. Starting a fight in these conditions could be dangerous. Local authorities may take hours to climb the mountain, or they may not drive until conditions improve. My strategy was to wait and plan. We were deadlocked that day. When it drizzled, I went to my workshop behind the house to avoid her. Carpentry repairs were my priority, and I needed a break from her. I saw her through a window browsing my living room bookshelf as if it were hers. Though the sight made my blood boil, I kept calm. In the evening, Mary Beth watched TV in the entire living room. She complained about my cable package because I didn't have a premium channel she liked. I said she could leave any time if she didn't like it. I only replied once, and she said, "Oh, hush, I'll gain your respect." It was probably my most uncomfortable night at home. Knowing a stranger was sleeping down the hall made me nervous. The next morning, thick fog and cool drizzle replaced the storms. I went outside to check the roads, which were still muddy but passable. Waiting for the afternoon sun, expected, might firm them up enough to drive safely into town. I returned home to tell Mary Beth our deal was final. No more negotiations. I was surprised to see her packing her suitcase in the spare room. I sigh in relief, but too soon. Still smug, she stopped in the living room and turned to me as she dragged it downstairs. "I'm helping you. No more staying here. Please note that I may report you for anything if you get in my way again. Just be glad I didn't charge you for keeping me out of a warm home during a severe storm." Her arrogance shocked me. I stood silently. She shook her head at me like I was an ungrateful fool who had missed a golden opportunity to be her ally. She exited into the fog, gave me one last look, and disappeared down the path toward her house with her suitcase. I locked the door and stared at the floor for a minute, releasing my tension. Since she was gone, I could breathe again. My relief turned to anger quickly. How dare she break in, threaten me, throw her weight around, and then say she was helping me by leaving? It was a shocking invasion of privacy. That wasn't the end, but just the start. Mary Beth began telling everyone her twisted story in the weeks that followed. She told neighbors I invited her in, then abused her and demanded money. Others heard I physically threatened her. Mary Beth asked some neighbors to testify against me in court. Fortunately, most neighbors had seen Mary Beth's antics before and ignored her. However, rumors in a small community are powerful, and some people who didn't know me questioned what happened. My duty was to correct the record. I wanted to gather evidence in case Mary Beth escalated her threats first. Leonard, my neighbor, had a security camera that partially faced my front porch. He lived lower down the road, but he caught Mary Beth climbing up to my house with her suitcase that stormy night. Although unclear, it captured a faint audio clip of her yelling before she barged in. Leonard gave me the footage without hesitation because he knew Mary Beth was illogical. That video alone proved she invaded my property. Teresa, another neighbor, kept Mary Beth's text messages bragging about cornering me into letting her stay. Mary Beth's behavior disgusted Teresa, who offered her phone as proof of her intentions. Armed with these, I decided to approach one of the more influential members of the community, a retired attorney named Mallory. She'd been living on the mountain for over a decade and occasionally offered free legal guidance to neighbors when minor disputes arose. I didn't intend to file a lawsuit, but I wanted to be prepared if Mary Beth tried anything else. Mallory watched the video, read the text messages, and shook her head in disbelief. "She's basically incriminating herself," Mallory observed. "If you want a restraining order, you could probably get one. If you're worried about your safety, I'd strongly consider it." I mulled it over. I wasn't so much afraid of physical harm. I was more concerned about false accusations or another break-in. Mallory explained that a simple protective order might deter Mary Beth from setting foot on my property again. I took her advice and contacted the local court. It was a bit of a process, filling out forms, detailing what had happened, but ultimately I was granted a preliminary protective order based on the evidence of her trespassing and intimidation. The next day, I served Mary Beth those papers with the help of a local deputy. She answered the door, saw the deputy, and instantly started yelling. "He's lying. He's just trying to ruin me." She made a big scene, but the deputy patiently explained that she was not under arrest. She was simply being handed a legal notice stating she must not step onto my property or contact me, except through a legal representative if she wanted to dispute the matter. Mary Beth tore the paper up in the deputy's face, but that didn't invalidate it. The order still stood. For a short while, Mary Beth seemingly backed off. She focused her campaign of gossip on the rest of the neighborhood, probably trying to dig up allies, but she found none. She'd burned too many bridges over the years. No one wanted to be associated with her. It appeared that the entire mountain community, which might not have been tight-knit originally, had banded together in its disdain for her. Ironically, Mary Beth's antics had the side effect of making me more accepted by the neighbors who empathized with what I'd gone through. They dropped by with groceries, offered help cleaning up my yard after the storms, and generally showed me a kindness I hadn't fully experienced before. But Mary Beth wasn't ready to concede defeat. One afternoon, I noticed a small crew of men with clipboards walking around the edge of my property. When I asked them who they were, they explained they were from the county planning office responding to a complaint about possible illegal structures on my land. Someone had filed an anonymous tip that I was building additions without permits. I knew exactly who that anonymous person was. I gave the county officials permission to look around. They found nothing illegal. My house was exactly as I'd bought it, with no unpermitted additions. The only structures were my tool shed and a small workshop, both of which had been there for decades, fully grandfathered into any local codes. The officials left without issue, rolling their eyes about yet another baseless complaint. They confided that Mary Beth had reported several neighbors for similar violations in the past. Undeterred, Mary Beth tried again the following week. I found a bright notice taped to my front door, claiming I was in violation of local ordinances for not clearing the brush near the property line. The notice had the official county seal, but was typed on regular paper. The wording was off, and some of it looked suspicious. I took the notice to the planning office in town. They confirmed it was a forgery. Someone had cut and pasted their logo from an online source onto a typed letter. The staff member I spoke with apologized for the inconvenience, but assured me it was not from them. They asked if I wanted to file a criminal complaint for forgery. I was tempted, but I wanted to play this strategically. I consulted with Mallory again. She was appalled by Mary Beth's escalation. "She's flirting with serious charges," Mallory said. You can absolutely press charges for forgery, or at least bring this to the attention of the authorities. In fact, you probably should. So I did. I filed a police report providing a copy of the forged notice. I made it clear I suspected Mary Beth, though I didn't have concrete proof that she was the one who created it. The police took my statement seriously. They said they'd investigate, but cautioned me that it could be difficult to prove she was the source unless there was direct evidence linking her to the document. Regardless, the paper trail was there. Around that time, I decided enough was enough. I was tired of waiting for Mary Beth's next stunt. She had threatened me, trespassed on my property, and now she was forging notices. I posted signs around my property perimeter that read, "No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted." I installed a couple of inexpensive yet functional security cameras around the house. I notified neighbors to keep an eye out for suspicious activity. Not long after the forgery incident, the punishment Mary Beth had brought on herself began to unfold. First came the official police investigation. Although the authorities couldn't directly prove she'd typed up the fake notice, they interviewed her. While rummaging through some of her personal documentation, warranted by a separate complaint from a neighbor claiming she had stolen property, the police discovered letters that matched the exact format and template of the phony county notice. She'd apparently tried forging similar documents in the past against other neighbors. The investigation widened, and they began looking into multiple complaints that Mary Beth had filed over the years. The local district attorney got involved, reviewing these for possible harassment or malicious prosecution charges. Then, a separate neighbor, who also felt victimized by her forgeries and false reports, decided to join the case. It turned out Mary Beth had previously served a forged document to them as well, claiming they owed back taxes for storing their RV in their driveway. These neighbors had simply ignored it at the time, suspecting a prank. But with the new context, they realized Mary Beth might be behind it. They filed a sworn statement. A few weeks later, Mary Beth was officially charged with multiple misdemeanors related to harassment, filing false complaints, and forging official documents. It was quite a whirlwind for our small community, which rarely sees more than the occasional petty theft or traffic violation. The news rippled through the mountain, and Mary Beth's once menacing aura deflated overnight. She had to appear in court. Some neighbors testified about her pattern of malicious behavior. I prepared to testify about her trespassing and intimidation, though the protective order alone was already strong evidence. The day of her hearing, Mary Beth arrived in a formal suit, looking every bit the disgruntled defendant. Despite all her bravado about having friends in high places, I noticed that no one came to her support. Her husband was conspicuously absent. I later heard rumors he had moved out temporarily, possibly seeking to separate from her. Mary Beth tried to play the victim card, claiming she was a misunderstood woman whose neighbors conspired to ruin her. But the evidence was overwhelming. The forged documents, the testimonies of multiple neighbors, and even some older complaints on record painted a clear picture. She was found guilty of forging official documents and sentenced to probation with a hefty fine. The judge also mandated that she attend mandatory counseling sessions for anger management and harassment. The protective order I had against her was extended. She was warned that any further contact or harassment toward me would result in immediate jail time. The community quietly rejoiced at the outcome. Mary Beth had been effectively muzzled, forced to face consequences for her actions after years of stirring up trouble. In the aftermath of the trial, Mary Beth seemed to vanish behind her closed doors. No more prying eyes, no more phone calls or forged complaints. For the first time since I moved to the mountain, I felt something close to genuine peace. It was astonishing how quickly the air felt lighter now that her intimidation tactics had backfired. Neighbors started saying hello to me more often, inviting me to small gatherings. The older couple down the way offered to trade fresh vegetables from their garden for some carpentry work I'd been doing. It was as though the entire mountain breathed a collective sigh of relief that Mary Beth's reign of harassment was over. I even learned something interesting. Mary Beth, prior to that final escalation, had systematically tried to use scare tactics on at least half the people in our small community. She threatened them with lawsuits, feigned alliances with government officials, and wrote letters filled with baseless accusations. But because no one had rallied against her before, she continued to get away with it. When she finally made her biggest mistake, breaking into my house and forging county notices, her house of cards collapsed. For me personally, it was a wake-up call. Living the reclusive life on the mountain was idyllic, but it didn't mean I could ignore serious threats or bullies. I learned to stand my ground. By refusing to cower and by carefully gathering evidence, I managed to see real consequences delivered to someone who was convinced she was untouchable. It wasn't a sweet victory in the sense of me enjoying her downfall. It was more like relief, that justice and logic had prevailed in a bizarre situation that felt almost surreal. In the months that followed, Mary Beth attempted to sell her property. The listing sat on the market, with very few showings. Rumor had it she was trying to get a big city price tag for her mountain house, and no one was willing to pay. She didn't attend any community events, and she no longer tried to befriend or intimidate neighbors. She was, in every sense, isolated. Ironically, after all those years of calling me a hermit, she ended up the true recluse, holed up in her house that no one wanted to buy. I still live in my charming mountain cabin. I've fortified my security measures, installed sturdy locks, and I keep a record of any suspicious activity just in case she tries anything in the future. But honestly, since her court appearance, she's been quiet. There was a fleeting rumor that she was leaving town to escape the toxic environment, as she called it. But that rumor faded when her property never sold. Sometimes I wonder if Mary Beth thinks back to that stormy night she forced her way into my living room, if she regrets pushing me into a corner, if she wishes she'd just gone to a motel, avoided forging documents, and lived peacefully. But that's not my concern anymore. All I know is I did what I had to do to protect my home, my rights, and my sanity. I'll always be grateful to the neighbors who stepped up and helped me gather evidence, the retired attorney who guided me, and even the county officials who saw through her lies. It took a village, but we managed to restore order to our little mountain community. There's a lesson here for anyone who lives in a small, close-knit area, or even a big city. Sometimes, no matter how much you'd rather avoid conflict, you have to fight back when your rights are trampled. It's better to face the threat head-on than to let a bully keep pushing. My house might not be a mansion and I might not have piles of wealth, but I have the security of knowing that I stood up for myself. And that's worth more than anything. As for Mary Beth, she's still around, quiet as a mouse. Every now and then I'll see her peeking through her curtains as I drive by. She'll probably never apologize, but her punishment is plain to see. She's ostracized, on probation, and out thousands of dollars in fines and legal fees. She made the mistake of crossing the line, and in the process, lost whatever social standing she thought she had. Her arrogance led her straight into trouble, and the entire mountain knows it. Some might say karma caught up with her. Others might say it's simply justice. Either way, the end result stands. Now, when I sit by my fireplace at night, sipping tea and listening to the wind through the pines, I feel a deeper peace than ever before. I can finally enjoy my mountain home without looking over my shoulder. The storm Mary Beth brought into my life has passed, and I'm still here, in my cozy refuge, living life the way I always wanted, in tranquility, surrounded by the natural beauty that drew me here in the first place. Friends, thank you. See you soon.